So how many of you have asked yourself, is how I spend my time meaningful? If I told you that on average you work 10,000 days in your life, some of you might think, oh, that's a lot. Others here might think, oh, that's very little. But isn't the real question how we spend each and every one of these 10,000 days? So today I want to share a little bit about my story and why I ask myself that every day. I studied mathematics, and like many other mathematicians, I interned in banking. And there I asked myself, is this meaningful? Is this how I want to be spending my time? I finished my studies and I went into consulting, which at the time seemed like the next obvious step. And there I had the great privilege to be working alongside some bright, smart, incredible people, solving client problems, staying up late. But then that question started coming up again. Is that how I want to be spending my time? I also started seeing some of these big societal issues. So here I was with some really bright, smart people and these big societal problems, yet these people were not working on these problems. So I started questioning myself, how will we solve these problems if we don't let these people work on them? And in most TED Talks, now here comes this epic emotional moment. But there wasn't one for me. I just started questioning myself. And maybe there isn't one for you either, right? That it doesn't have to be that one special moment. So I left what at the time might have seemed a really highly regarded career. And I left not knowing really what was going to be next. But I left with that one idea, how to bring people and these big social problems together. And then on my way, I had three major realizations. My first realization was these big societal problems, they're all collective action problems. They are all problems that, inherent in their nature, cannot be solved alone. They require multiple stakeholders across sectors to come together and work collectively. Collective action problems are problems where individuals and groups actually have the same interest in having them solved, yet they fail to do so because of egos and individual interests. Climate change, migration, labor shortages, resource utilization, they're all collective action problems. So now moving on to my second realization. My second realization was that these collective problems could not be solved with the tools and the methods of the past. Maybe let me just repeat that. So these collective problems cannot be solved with the tools and the methods of the past. So we need to really rethink how we come together to work on them, how we build these new, unusual alliances, how we maybe enter open social innovation processes, build new public civic partnerships. Really, the question is not just, lots of people talk about the what, but shouldn't we be talking about the how? Because we need a new how. So if competition was the driver of the past, isn't collaboration the driver of the future? And at this point, again, you might expect, okay, here come all the big numbers about problems. And I could be saying things like, in Germany, if you ask people which political party is best suited to solve problems, actually 2/3 of the people will say no party at all. Or that, when you look at social cohesion and trust in democratic institutions, it has decreased dramatically in recent years. But, I feel like I don't want to get stuck on the problem and Most of you will have heard these numbers or might have even felt them in the last few weeks and months. So I rather want to move on to my third realization. And my third realization is that lots of people talk about working together. I'm really not the first one to tell you this. But very few people actually do. So that's when I started saying, why not build these spaces where people across sectors can come together and build new alliances? And I want to give you 3 examples of alliances that I've been part of. My first example is when the corona pandemic hit, and it hit us all. I was part of a group that brought together 28,000 people, and we worked on 2,000 challenges that we'd collected from all over Germany. And I remember very vividly this weekend, we're all sitting at home, I was sitting at home, and these 28,000 people coming together on Slack and Zoom and YouTube, and I remember sitting there and feeling this power of the collective. When people come together in a solution-oriented, constructive way, and when you give people the feeling that they're needed and that they can actually contribute. And it was under the patronage of the federal government of Germany, with all the ministries and thousands of citizens. And then weeks and months later, we saw hundreds of these projects being actually implemented, improving regional public health offices, supporting women that become victims of domestic violence, and managing testing capacities. So that's just my first example. So maybe let's move on to the second. So my second example, I was also part of a group that set up an alliance just 4 days after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine in 2022. And there, within only 2 weeks, we brought together 450 organizations from public administration, large and small corporates, civil society organizations, social entrepreneurs, all the way to citizens. And this alliance managed to pool resources, managed to provide organization and matching services, and collectively managed to provide schooling for 100,000 school children, housing for tens of thousands of refugees, and psychosocial support in their arrival process, just to name a few examples of what came out of this alliance. This alliance exists until today and has now moved on to structurally improve arrival and integration processes in Germany. So really from an acute crisis all the way to long-term structural change with hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders. So this is my second example. So maybe, all the good things are 3, so let's give you a third example. I'm also part of an alliance that works on changing our agriculture and food systems. It's also an alliance of multiple hundred stakeholders, from conventional farmers to regenerative farmers, large and small corporates, media, our federal ministry, public administrators. And only a few weeks ago, I was at a festival conference, a new form of convening, and I remember we were in little breakout groups, and I remember standing there, and people were coming together around challenges that nobody of them could solve alone, but they were kind of like huddling together to work on them collectively. And I could really sense that feeling of we are not alone in this room. And 2/3 of the people left these 3 days saying that they had found someone that they wanted to work with or had joined a collective action project. So these are 3 examples of mission-oriented alliances, of multiple hundred organizations, from large and small corporates, social entrepreneurs and social innovators, public administrators, government, and citizens. And this is how I spend my time today, building these alliances. And I can tell you, I have seen collective action in practice, and I have seen it work. So, coming up to this TED Talk, I was talking to someone, and I told them about the topic of this talk. And that person goes, "Oh, Henrike, that's so inspiring. I should really take on a volunteer role and contribute." It's like, that's great. But I also want to point out one other thing, is that we cannot continue destroying this world in our full-time jobs and then trying to save it in our volunteer roles. So maybe coming to a close, why am I telling you all of this now? We live in a time where democracies are being tested. Not just tested, but challenged. We live in a time where it's really a battle of the systems, where we need to show that our democratic institutions are capable of solving these collective action problems. And if you are now a person that says, "Oh, Henrike, that's great, but that's way too big for me. I have no idea how to contribute," then you have fallen into the collective action trap. Because we need you, and we need every single one of you. So next time when you see a problem and you think there should be a solution for that, don't turn away, but stop, listen, and learn. And maybe start asking yourself, who else shares that interest? Is there other individuals or groups that I could potentially collaborate with? Because I think in these times, let's harness the biggest power that we actually have in democracies, and that's the power of the collective. So for the remaining part of my 10,000 days, I know that I want to be driving collective action forward. And now the question's over to you. How are you going to spend yours? Thank you.